All right, on today's episode of the podcast, we've got RJ Singh, and he's dialed in from Australia, founder of Ultra Habits and host of the Ultra Habits podcast. So, RJ, thanks for coming on today, man. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, Dale, thanks for having me on the show. Firstly, just want to thank you for getting me on here. I know we had some 5 a.m., 4:30 a.m. calls, which was interesting with the time delay. So I am the founder of Ultra Habits. I'm also an executive director at a disruptive logistics business down here in Australia called Cora Group. And yeah, we're just at Ultra Habits, we're all about performance, right? So, what are the systems, the processes, the habits that we can engage on a daily basis that help us be successful? And obviously, success looks different to individuals. So, it's all within the context of your life, right?
Yep, 100%. So, getting into that, like, tell us a little bit about like your background. Where'd you grow up? How'd you end up in Australia? What's your whole story?
Yeah, look, there's the novel piece, and then there's the kind of abridged version. I'll give you the abridged version. So, I was born here in Australia in the early 80s, and we migrated to San Francisco Bay Area. And, I had a immigrant's journey in terms of my upbringing. My dad worked a lot. He had a cleaning company. Him and his brother just grinded. They were selling by day, cleaning by night, and we never saw him, but he provided, right?
Yeah.
And growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 80s, it was a dynamic environment, multicultural. There was this kind of undertone of uh, liberal views, but a bit of hood culture. And it was just a really interesting place to grow up. I was a really maladjusted kid, very, I think they'd call attention hyperactive, and hyperactivity disorder, whatever they call it nowadays. But I had
Mhm.
all kinds of issues. I think that in the view of the psychological field, they call it issues. Whether or not I call it issues today, I guess is a different story. But I was just not quite right, and I took to alcohol, I took to drugs, and that led me down a road of crime, institutions, uh, rehabs, and just a whole bunch of shit in terms of what I had to deal with in that life. And, by the time I was 25 years old, I was a, multiple convicted felon. I had a very dangerous lifestyle. I was making money the wrong way, and, I couldn't see any way out. Some shit happened, and basically, I made a decision to leave the country. And when I left the country, I couldn't go back. And that's when I arrived in Australia, and that became the part of a new chapter. It didn't start off well, but I eventually did start to get on the transformation path once I got down here.
What do you think was missing, like with regard to your childhood growing up in the Bay Area, and ADHD obviously is a factor, but like, what do you think was like pulling you into that world as opposed to not? You know what I mean? Like, what was it? What was it?
Yeah,
Lack of purpose,
yeah.
lack of attention? Like, what was it?
When I use that word ADHD, I use it in a cynical manner, right? I think we label everything. When I go back to the United States, it's super weird how much when you watch TV, pharma is throwing drugs down your throat. They don't actually do that here in Australia. I don't think it's legal. But when you're watching TV, when I go back home, like there is medication after medication just being thrown down everyone's throat, right? So I think we're all born with different constitutions, a bit of nature, a bit of nurture. But given the framework that we're given as children, that then enables us to thrive or barely survive or barely function or not function. And I think what happened was I had no framework, I had no real system orientation that helped me live a good life or orientate me towards kind of purposeful living. So because I stood for nothing, I fell for everything.
Yeah.
And I really, really needed to feel part of. I had a very weak sense of self. And then you couple all that stuff with a highly addictive personality. It was a powder keg and a recipe for disaster.
Do you think like you mentioned your father working, grinding, you didn't see him? Do you think that attributed to it, just not having a father figure to kind of put up those guardrails for you and kind of keep you in some sort of framework? Was that number one? I don't want to assume that was a problem, but was that a problem? Did that you think kind of play into where you went?
That's a really good question, Dale. So, my father grew up without a father. His father was murdered in an alcohol kind of fueled event. And my dad was an alcoholic. And he is an introvert and a very complicated man, and a man that you really actually can't have a conversation with
Hmm.
without him getting frustrated or being very difficult. So you're kind of walking on eggshells around him.
Right.
In the 80s, he was even more volatile because he was a younger man. And I now know he was probably drinking throughout the day at the office. And, we didn't really see him. He didn't, his definition of success was providing a home. But upon reflection, we never had conversations other than his random gems of kind of pontification,
Right.
about how to live life. So I had a really involved mom in the sense that she was very nurturing and very loving and probably made up for what my dad lacked. But there was no sense of direction from a man. And that actually, we can talk about that later, sent me down a path of looking in at any given point in my criminal life as well as my business and positive life. I've always had a strong male figure.
Hmm.
Uh, and I wonder how that correlates to the lack of that when I was growing up.
Yeah. No, I think it's real interesting. Now, did you have siblings?
I had siblings, so I had a brother who was about 7 years older than me, and because of that age gap and dad not really being around, my big brother served as almost the uncle or dad in many ways. He kind of became the disciplinarian, and he was the one that, during the summer when, back in the US, it's crazy to think about it. Here in Australia, kids are free for 3 months a year. That's like another recipe for disaster. Like, like parents are working, kids are running amok for 3 months of the year. And my brother was very much the one that kind of hold it down, make sure I was cleaning the house daily, like the disciplines were there. And he was the one, in junior high coming into school to, he kicked my ass in front of the school once because I was cutting class. Like, he was the one that really tried to, I think, give me some discipline, but he was a kid himself, right? So when he became like 17, 18, he went off on his own, journey and struggles, right? So yeah, that was, yeah, it was interesting times, Dale.
Yeah, and I was gonna. So, what was the age difference in you guys?
7 years.
7 years. So he was pretty senior to you as a kid. That's a lot, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, now what kind of like what did you end up? I think you said you're a felon. Like, what did you get arrested for? What did you get convicted for?
Yeah, so I mean, when I was in high school, you know, I was an athlete, right? I was in the Olympic development program in soccer, and I think anyone you would have asked would have told you I was destined for to play in the MLS or go overseas. I went to Europe as a kid. I went to Belgium, played in Holland. I had a natural gift, plus I had a good work ethic. What's interesting upon reflection, in high school, the crowd and the peer group that I ran with, whilst being a good athlete was cool, it wasn't regarded as, like, there was no real perceived limelight in it from my perspective. Because within the context of where I was, the school maybe, or the group I was running with, the context of being a good athlete wasn't really one that got me respect. And because I had a loose sense of who I was, that was painful.
Mm,
But what I started to notice was the kids that had some of the cool clothes, they had money, they had stuff. There was this kind of pecking order, and they seemed to be at the top. I'd come in and wear the same shit all the time. I didn't have the cool clothes. It wasn't that we were poor. My parents just didn't value that, in that, right? So because I had this weak sense of identity, it really hurt. And then what happened was, I started to cut class, drink alcohol, smoke weed. I needed to facilitate my use. And a drug dealer put drugs in my hands. I think the first thing I sold was like LSD or acid. And I'll never forget, I'm 15, 16 years old. People are buying it from me, tabs, drops, they used to call it, sugar cubes. And the power I felt. And that was it.
mm.
And I was good at it because I could hustle, I had drive, I knew how to talk, I knew how to move and groove. And now you got this 15, 16-year-old kid who's a chronic alcoholic, finding a source of power and purpose. I had no chance.
Right.
I had no chance at that point because now I found something that is getting me up that totem pole. And that was it. That was it. I tried to play soccer for 2 more years. I got on house arrest when I was 17. They agreed to send me to Europe because my coach was a professional soccer player. He was from New Jersey. He told the courts I could live with him and go and play. And I lasted out in Belgium for a year because I was less than a year. I was just getting drunk and hanging out at the pubs with the old men, smoking cigarettes. And I came back to the US in my senior year. I got addicted to meth.
Mm.
And then that really took me down a dark path where, you're talking about selling drugs, going to jail for distribution, firearms come into that. I wasn't a violent person, but I knew that perception of violence was important. And, that was to become my life for the next 10 years or whatever until I was 26.
Wow. So in and out of jail, what was it? Addicted to meth. So you're trying to fund your addiction, probably. So you're. It's kind of sounds like, was it like just a cycle? Go
It,
in,
it,
get
it,
out.
yeah, it was. And whenever I got out, I was really good, and I'm really good at picking myself up because as a chronic fuck up, you kind of have to learn how to pick yourself up. And if you got that kind of X factor, which I know you know what I'm talking about, Dale, you'll put it together pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And I would try to get a job, entry level sales job. I'd go to the job, I'd get the job, I'd sit there in a boiler room making cold calls, not knowing what the fuck I'm doing. And I'm like, you know what? My addiction starts to kick in, the craving starts to kick in. I'm like, there's an easier way to make money. I've come out, I've got no friends anymore because all the fair weather fake friends aren't there when you don't have the money, when you don't have anything. And I would just be like, I can't, again, I didn't see any potential success in doing the right thing because I didn't have any signposts or guidance telling me, well, if you do X, Y, Z, you'll get here, and this is how you do it. So invariably, I just went back to the life that I knew, right? And I'd get caught up in the cycle again. And my life was such where, you know, somehow I put it together in 2001, and I kind of did some pulled some moves to get myself into a private university in San Francisco. That then enabled me to tell people I'm a student, business student, while I'm doing all kinds of crazy shit. I'd get clean for like 3 months, 6 months, and I would go to the bar and drink. And I would then my willpower would be weakened. I would go use. And it was crazy, Dale. As soon as I use, I would move into this alter ego character for another 8 months, year, 2 years until I got arrested. So what would happen is the moment I used, I started thinking, okay, how am I going to continue to use? And the next day or the day after, I'd be back into crime. It was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you tell it well, like because you can feel it like that. I wrote it down, like you didn't have a positive vision to satisfy your ambition, right? Like you're ambitious, you're a hustler, and you couldn't see how to satisfy it other than the excitement. Because even when you described like getting a job, like it was like, I saw it coming as you were telling, it was like, yeah, you're going to be bored with that, and then boom, there it goes. And you're right. That's where the alcohol comes in to like weaken your ambitions to kind of fall further into, like I say, there's things that aren't good for you. And then, it takes that little crack in your willpower, and down she
That's
goes.
it, man.
Down she
That's
goes.
it. It's something that I have to even recognize now. Like, you know, when you're deep in work or you're deep in business development for a prolonged period of time, and you get home from work, the office, it's 9 p.m., 10 p.m., or whatever. Sometimes even now when I'm driving home and it's late and I'm tired and it's dark on the road, I actually go back to the days when I was selling drugs on the road at night. Like I'll go there. It'll be like that feeling of familiarity where it's not too dissimilar. They call it legal and they call it commerce, and but the kind of drivers and the mechanisms, man, I can go right back there.
Right. Yeah. No, I can understand that drive, that hustle. I mean, that's why they call it hustle in the streets, right? Like in the hustle in the workplace now, it is the same factors, habits. Like they're not used for virtuous means, on the dark side, so to speak. But those factors are there, right? And that's why you're successful in that dark side. Same reason you're successful in the light side, if you will, in the workplace, is because those factors apply both sides. It's just they're not being put to a good use on the other.
I didn't know, if you would have asked me, when I started to move towards the powers of good or the light, I thought that when I was in that life, I was not disciplined. But upon reflection, because I quit using drugs towards the end, and just focused on the money, but my alcoholism just became prolific. But if I look at the disciplines I had in play in terms of the finances, the um, the the way that I dealt with people, how I got up early in the morning when I wasn't hungover, the planning of the day, the execution of that plan, there was a lot of intention there, and there was a system there that was really driven by my energy, my ambition, and there was a structure. But because I had this addiction, I was inconsistent. And obviously, because I'm operating in a subculture which is completely illegal. Um, but there is a correlating, there are correlating factors for
Right.
sure.
Yeah. Or habits, if you will, you know. So what was the tipping point that, so all this is going on in the States for 10 years, like what transacted to take you out of that situation to Australia?
Yeah. So I'm 26. I'm in the Bay Area. I'm living in Vallejo, which is between Oakland and Sacramento. You know, I love hustling. There's something about it. Even the suppliers used to be to me. They're like, "Dude, you're crazy. Like you just are knee deep in it, right?" Like it was everything to me because my identity was formed by that. It gave me power, and I'm getting to a place where I've got a college degree. I've got a couple felonies behind me. Can't really work with that college degree. I could have if I applied myself, but I wasn't willing to. And my girlfriend, who we probably would have gotten married, was a drug user, IV user, a good girl from a difficult situation. We have an extremely volatile relationship, and I'm dealing with a situation where my green card is up for renewal. I had never become a US naturalized citizen because I'm in the streets. Who the fuck goes and does administration when they're in the streets?
Right.
And after 9/11, anti-terrorism laws start getting applied in different areas that are not necessarily foreign terrorism. And so there's a lot of scrutiny around people that, whilst I'd been in the US since I was 3, I wasn't a naturalized citizen. So I've got to renew my green card. I know they're going to basically put a hold on it and potentially try to export me back to Australia. I'm living in a completely illegal life still. And I've got this relationship where I'm like, at some point, one of us is going to kill each other. We loved each other in some weird, sick, twisted way. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was. I don't know. But I just remember talking to my mom about a week or so before I left, saying, Ma, and she had always been my support, my rock, right? Like, I can't pull myself out of this. I actually can't get out. The interesting thing, Dale, is that I started to give things away to people before I knew I was going to leave. And I wonder if subconsciously I knew that was happening. So there were people that had owed me money. I'd taken things and, I had all this stuff at my house, collateral. I just started to return it to people. And I really just wanted to disappear. And I think now reflecting, I kind of knew I was going to leave and I wanted to leave on a clean slate. And what ended up happening was one night I was out and I was at a bar. There was a situation and an altercation at that bar, and I left. And the next day, I called my mom, and she said that she'd spoke to somebody, and that situation had blown up. And I, not wanting to be involved in anything, which later on I found out there was actually no one looking for me. I wasn't under arrest or anything like that, but just not wanting to be implicated with anything. I said to my mom, I'm going to leave. And that very day, I bought a one-way plane ticket to Australia. I went to Target, bought a suitcase, filled it with clothes, and went and stayed in a hotel for 2 days waiting to exit the country. That was the beginning of the end of that life. When I got to the plane, I remember looking at my dad and saying, my dad was distraught. And I remember saying to him, it's a shit situation, but I'm going to get out there and I'm going to make you proud. I'm going to turn this shit around. And I'll never forget the moment that plane started docking off the jettison, the tack, because I love the US, right? Like I love home. Like even though I'm in Australia, there's a spiritual home here to a degree, but my home is the Bay Area. And
Mm.
I remember just pulling away, thinking that's it. That's a wrap. So that was how I ended up leaving, man.
Wow, that's powerful, and I think like, and was it that you were hustling and all that, but just what was it? Just you were becoming aware, like the hell that you were living, like the high wasn't hiding it anymore, like you were just
I
because you
didn't want
mentioned
to.
you mentioned the girlfriend and I right, if work sucks and you're coming home to home sucks, like that, like you're living in hell. So was it like the relationship was just just
I
like I don't know, I was just trying to
I
find a
think
tipping point for you to say, man, I
I
got to
think what
change.
I think what it was, Dale. I knew I would end up in prison for life.
Mm,
I knew that was coming. California strike three laws. I was on my way there, and I now, as an older person, seeing and being exposed to people that traveled that path, now know people that have life sentences, and their trajectory to that life sentence was no different than mine. It wasn't intentional. They just kept getting caught for some critical shit. And I just knew I did not want to spend the rest of my life in a California state penitentiary. So um, that was becoming really crystallized, and I think survival instinct kicked in,
yeah, yeah,
and
no, I
I
can
just,
see that.
you know what I'm saying, bro? Like I just could not pull myself out of it back home.
Yeah,
I just couldn't. I didn't have the will, and I didn't have the path. What was I going to do?
yeah. What so you get on a plane to go to Australia, like did you have family, like because you had been in the States for a fair amount of time, it sounds like, right? Was it as much as 20 years or 15, 20 years?
Yeah, I was 26 at the time. I had left Australia when I was 3. So I've
Yeah,
been there
yeah.
23 years, right? So, you know, we have a global family. So, I've got aunts and cousins here. I land in Sydney, and the whole plane trip, I'm just drinking free booze, right? It's free flow, right? I'll never say no to free alcohol. I'm sitting between two girls that are really, really cute. It was interesting. And I get here, and the need to keep moving, like in the uncomfortability sets in and the reality sets in. And within a day or so, I decided to go to Brisbane, which is Queensland. It's a big state, but it's a smaller city, because I have a half sister that lives there. My dad had a daughter who lived there, and I decided to go there and reconnect. And I went to visit her on like day 2 of being in Australia, or day 3, and just decided to live there. The interesting thing is, I land in Australia January 26, 2008, and by March 3rd, I have a job in sales and an apartment fully furnished, and I'm off on my own. So it was extraordinary that in the space of such a short time, I picked myself up, and I got a job at the entry telesales job in logistics, and that's why I'm now in logistics at a DHL, which is a global company.
Mm.
And that was it. And that was extremely challenging, because I've now got this 9 to 5 life with a mindset that is like still stuck back in a certain lifestyle in a foreign country with very little support, and everything just is unfamiliar, and I've got no life skills.
And was the temptation there, like so back in the States you had that cycle where you got in the box 9 to 5, got bored, turned the page, went back. It was that temptation still creeping there? Like you did the right thing, right? Because it sounds like a lot of addicts, they say, man, the minute you let them out of rehab, if they go right back to that same environment, they're done. So the best thing, it seems like, is to get them out of that environment. So it sounds like you got yourself out of that environment. but you're back in maybe this little lower speed circumstance. Maybe where was the temptation there to do the same thing in Australia?
Here's the thing. I quit any drugs well before I got here.
Hmm.
I knew I could not use drugs here because I knew that if I used drugs, I was done. My alcoholism became prolific and very dark because now I'm living in my head of where I came from. Heartbroken, underskilled, ambition has got me to a decent starting point, and I'm battling now the fact I'm drinking every night, but I've got to go to work, which I never had to do. That was hard. Now, my drinking and where I was drinking in Brisbane was interesting because I was going to the seediest strip clubs and using it as a bar because that's what I felt comfortable in,
Hmm.
being where everything was loose and, and people were just, it was just debauchery, right? And that's where I felt very comfortable. So, I did that. I held it together for a year and then fell apart and, went to France to go join the French Foreign Legion, was there for a while, aborted, came back here with nothing, and then, got another job. I thought I'd now learn my lesson, kept drinking through that job, and that fell apart. And then I got another job at a firm where it was privately owned. They were a disruptor. They're now my biggest competitor at Cora. But I met one of the directors there, who took a major liking and interest to me. And he was a natural teacher and a lover of the underdog and a lover of the Bay Area, which was interesting because he lived there.
Oh, wow.
And I basically surrendered my story to him one day at the height of my drinking. Um, and that was the turning point.
Up till that point, did many people know your backstory and what you had come from?
Certain people that I was working with, like peers, did. And to be fair to the company that I went to once I came back from the French Foreign Legion, they're a massive corporate organization. The directors would show up at my house because I would be, I'd go AWOL for 2 or 3 days. The sales manager would lie for me. They saw a lot of potential in me. One of the sales managers in a different division tried to take me to church, right? Like they tried, but there was something missing there that when I got to a place about a year later, I was in a much better place to embrace transformation and change.
Hmm. Hmm. And then this mentor, do you feel the mentor kind of filled that fatherly figure that you were kind of missing maybe until that point?
It's funny because we caught up yesterday. We catch
Hmm.
up weekly. When I left that firm in 2015 to come to Cora, our relationship fell apart a little bit because we're deep competitors. And he felt I did the wrong thing on the way out, which I kind of did. I did. But we've reconnected now that I've moved to Victoria. I've moved back to the state that he's in because Cora head office is here. And now we're seeing each other every week. Our kids are the same age. It's very special. Like we have two kids the same age. He's in a much better place, he's much better balanced. He modeled some really prolific workaholism.
Hmm.
But we caught up yesterday and I said to my wife, I said, I haven't been around Matthew consistently for since 2015. And now I see him every week, twice a week. I said, I have such a deep emotional connection to this man and trust. And it's just like I feel like for the first time in 6 years, I've come back to a place where I have someone in my corner from a business perspective, like in that life. Like my wife's
Yeah.
totally in my corner, but I can't have those conversations with her.
Yeah.
And it's just profound, the level of buy-in I have to this guy. But to your earlier question, yes, I do. I feel what happened was when we going back to when I joined his company in 2010 is when I joined his company. I was a sales rep still drinking, but at that point I'd fallen enough here in Australia to know I needed to focus on work. And the environment, the culture, because it was privately owned, there was something special there, right? But I'm still drinking madly. I'm like, this it's just crazy, right? Like I'm coming to work with stitches in my head. People are asking me what happened. Like I got hit in the head with a bottle, tell them I fell off a bike. Like it's just weird shit, right? Like and and they've got this sales manager who's not a partner, and he's driving me because he knows that through driving me, it's driving everyone else. And this particular director was a CFO at the time. So he didn't have a lot to do with me. But they made an announcement that he was going to come over and become the general manager, which meant that I would report to the sales manager that reported to him. We had a one on one, and I just knew there was something in this dude that was actually altruistic. He cared. And I had a bender on the weekend, and I had a really bad bender. And the Monday, instead of calling my sales manager, I texted him, who was his boss, and said, I'm resigning. It was like 5 a.m. I sent this text. He calls me the next morning and says, let me give you some life and career advice. Don't make life altering decisions 5 a.m. when you're drunk. He said, let's catch up tomorrow at a coffee shop. And we caught up at a coffee shop, and I told him, A, your sales manager is no good, and he's driving me. And whilst I'm out of control, he's not really supporting me. And he knew that too. He knew the sales manager wasn't any good. And he appeared to really care. Like I remember telling him, and I'll still remember the look on his face when I told him how the sales manager was operating. And then the second thing I did was I told him my story for some reason. And I think the next week he was, um, I was with him every day from there on in. And anything he did, if I went out to client meetings, he came. If he went interstate to do business, he took me. He would run. He'd always have his running shoes. I would run, and I'd be huffing and puffing because I'm smoking 50 cigarettes a day and eating, shit food. But he started to model what success looked like. And what he told me without telling me was, you're my tribe, RJ. You just don't know it yet. And once I got that messaging, I was off. Admittedly, I also decided to get back into AA because I knew this was the last chance of success in my view. I was 28, 20 something, 27, 28. So I decided to get sober and then let this man lead me to where he thought I could go. That was it.
So it was like your second epiphany moment, right? The first one was I got to do something or bad things are going to happen, and this one was I got to do something or I'm going to miss a huge opportunity here, right? Like you kind of saw this big opportunity to get out of it in a good way. You had that positive vision that you didn't have before, right? Before you had that negative vision. You're like, if I don't do something, this is going to happen. And this time it's like if I don't do something, I'm going to miss out on that.
He, in many ways, if I liken my relationship to him, in a similar way that Mike Tyson did with Customato.
Hmm.
I really resonate with Mike Tyson's view of cuz when it comes to Matthew, because what he did was he gave me a pathway to transform. He didn't realize that maybe. He also didn't focus on why I'd been an unsuccessful human. He just said, this is what excellence looks like. And you got the material, but you just need to fall. He was so confident in his ability. I mean, we talked about this yesterday. We look at the senior executives in our category here. So many came out of his grad program. He just had that ability. And in certain ways, there was probably a bit of a defect of character there where he needed to fix people,
Hmm. Yeah.
which burnt him at times. But I leveraged that and became very intentional to deliver
Right.
to his
Yeah.
expectation.
Yeah. Now, look, setting an example is, to me, like one of the most powerful leadership traits. Leadership influence, whichever, right? Show people what's possible. When you see it, you can believe it. And especially when it's like close to you like that, or you can have a mentor that can help. You're not just seeing it on TV. You're not, on the tube. You actually have that resource at hand, to kind of see it firsthand and then inquire and learn and, all those things. Really powerful stuff. So how did things transpire from there? Are talking about the AA stuff. So you're a non-drinker now at this point, I would imagine, or?
Complete abstinence, bro. I've been sober for over 10 years.
Wow, congratulations.
I look to rid and look to minimize vice. I have a stoic's perspective without being a practicing stoic. I work out of some of their journaling. I have my own practice, which is very existential, meaning it's very how I be in the world. And, for me, it's about minimization of things that impact my ability to live intentionally with powerful will. I try not to fuck around, because I don't like slavery.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying, bro? Like,
yeah.
I know I may be polarizing what, the effects of vice are, but that's how I view it.
No, I mean it's 100% the truth. I mean, it goes back to, this conversation comes up a lot, and I mean this podcast is about enabling growth, and it always comes up about the effect of alcoholism, and alcohol, and we I think we hit on it really well earlier, which is it puts a crack in that willpower, and I've seen it is becomes that little sliver in your armor, that those other things can start sliding into and then start prying it open. And that, then like we said earlier, then it's a wrap.
I feel that there's a really interesting, I reflected upon this a few weeks ago. We don't talk about willpower anymore. Have you noticed that as a society? Like, it's something that we just don't really discuss.
Well, man, so
you know,
because everything's this huge comfort zone, there's this huge comfort zone. Like, why do you have to have willpower today? I mean, there's no necessity really. I mean, what's the necessity to have the willpower to, let's just go easy, be fit? Why do you need to be fit? Why do you need to not drink, right? Like, it's so easy. I mean, all your problems go away. Like, so I don't know. I mean, I think culturally, it's promoted. It's hard to avoid, I guess I'll say. It's to kind of seek to be so comfortably numb, even I'll go there. That to live a life of, we'll use another word that's a great virtue, but it's got this bad rap, which is discipline. Like living a life of discipline. That there's a small number, man. I mean, I would say today, I don't know. I think the one good thing that social media and all this is bringing about is we are seeing those of us who do believe in, you said slavery. I'm going to take the other side, freedom, right? Whether it's financial freedom, mental freedom, like, freedom of bad habits and all these things. We are finding each other, right? And you said it's a lonely place without that, and I've been fortunate, like over the last year doing this, like to come across some great high performers like you and other guys who I'm like, man, I enjoy talking to these guys because, not that my local circle, I don't mean anything bad about them, but it's nice to run into other high performers and just talk at this level, from a relatability factor, I guess, to kind of go, that appreciate it, and a life of routine and good habit and all that stuff, the willpower part, because it again, this is no judgment, but it's easy not to be that. It's so easy not to be that. You can get away with everything with no consequence, to a degree. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of
No,
my quick
I
version on
agree.
it.
I agree. I agree with you. I think that is why in the West people do Spartan, right? Like I talked to Joe about this a couple times. Like he's basically manufacturing adversity for people that don't have enough of it.
Yeah.
And we're celebrating ourselves for strengthening ourselves. Why do we do that? Because subconsciously we believe we're weak.
Yeah.
We believe and we know we're a weak society
Yeah.
because we've gone for efficiency and optimization, which is good. But in the process of that, we've lost the ability to optimize ourselves.
Yeah.
It's like that movie my son watches all the time on Disney, where it's their robots and like it's the future Wally.
Oh,
In the
right. Oh,
future,
yeah.
they're all living. Have you seen that?
Yeah. I know exactly.
They're all like overweight. They don't want to move. They're on a ship.
And
Like
the
it's
robots that are doing everything for them. Like
yeah,
we don't even need to leave our house to socialize anymore, right? Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
uh, yeah. And I think, look, it's no surprise that you can map all the current mental health crisis stuff to this very primal need of fulfillment and engagement and meaning. We talked a little bit earlier about like lack of meaning and the effects of that. We're seeing so much diversity in the negative effects of kind of what's going on today, with everything kind of again being so accessible and easy to get and easy to indulge on, and this dopamine market, of whether it's sugar or social media or I mean, it's like I say, it's so easy just to be comfortable and satisfy these bad habits and avoid good ones. And there's no necessity.
Yeah. I what I tend to look at is, I tend to think that whilst being open, having an open kind of being open, having an open posture in life to being receptive, we have to move through life vigilant not against this perceived political enemy. We're vigilant now against the wrong things, I think, like ideas, and we can't debate properly. Like we're vigilant in ways that I think may not be effective. But what I mean by vigilance is vigilant to the decisions that are laid upon us and the paths we take with those decisions, micro decisions. Am I vigilant when I walk to the company fridge after there's an apple sitting there and there's a fucking bag of candy sitting there? My vigilance is going to move me towards the right decision. But we don't live that way. We're on
Uh,
autopilot.
yeah, I was thinking this morning, man, because I think I think you just said it right. This manufactured enemy, right? And I was thinking this morning, I said, we found the enemy and he is us, right? Like that old quote, like it is us, man. We're our own detriment. Like we're so tangled up in these external conflicts and politics, and it's a great distraction from the stuff that we know we should be doing, right? To your part, like we know we're wrong, we know we're weak, but we're not willing to go through the pain to test ourselves and whatever. Again, living that comfort life. So which is a better spend of your energy if you're of that mindset, going to the gym or getting online and complaining about the latest divisive political debate, right? You can go exhaust your primal energy on literally nothing, literally nothing. But it's so easy to do that. And again, the more, just like I say, this morning I was kind of reflecting on it, just kind of, in my head. I was like, yeah, we found the enemy, and he is us. Yeah, like we're just,
Hmm.
we're in a spiral here with all this social discontent. Really.
Well, yeah. Well, here's the go, right? Like, I think that when you look at that, like, I will teach my children to be the change they want to see. And what that means is we strengthen the man or woman should strengthen themselves first, and with the view of impacting their environment. If an individual is simply pontificating about change, they're actually not embodying that change, they're part of the problem.
Yeah.
So if an individual isn't strengthening their mind, body, spirit to be a better member of society, then their rants and raves are actually adding fuel to a fire, because they're not coming with a solution, because they should be the solution. Their very embodiment should be the solution.
It's like what I talked
That's
about
the
earlier,
problem.
right? The greatest uh, trait of leadership is setting the example, right? You don't need to be in charge of people, but you can set an example and indirectly lead them to a better way. I'd say that's the biggest thing I get back from this podcast since I've been doing it. And again, I just wanted to have authentic conversations with real people and overcoming challenges. Again, back to setting the example, seeing the example. And that's the biggest feedback I get about this. Like to alcohol for a moment, I'll get a lot of response like, hey man, I listened to XYZ podcast, you guys talked about not drinking, and so I gave it a try. And they talk about the impact. That's what you're talking about. Like, we got to get out there and just put it on display, because I think the way I put this often is like, I'm a soldier in a good fight, because there's not enough soldiers in the fight that you just described, like being the positive role models in the world. Not you go on Instagram and there's all this indulgence in cars and women and like, that stuff's fake, man. It's not real life. Real life is hard, and and it takes the struggle, and you've got to be prepared to square to and lean into that struggle. Like, and that's right here. No one, that's right here. That's where that work and the necessity really is, that we hide from. Life's not going to get any easier. It's not easy. And if you think it is, it's coming. If you're coasting, it's coming. Um, and so that's I guess what I really enjoy about this and these conversations is having it. And even to your point, I'm the same way with my kids. Like, one of the things, I don't really drink. I don't drink, and the reason is I don't want to give them that. I don't want them looking at me, and especially now, these teenage kids. I mean, you lived it obviously, but they're finding the kids, for the same reasons, I think, with the social media, and they're in their heads in all the wrong way, and they're trying to be accepted because they don't think they're good enough. They drink and to be cool, like a lot of the things that you described, to fit in, and they know they're wrong, but they feel they have to do it. And I just want to at least be an example for my sons and daughter that you don't have to. I don't. You don't have to. I, and I still have a good time and a great life, and
Mhm.
in all these things, but I don't have to indulge in these things I know that don't serve me, and you don't either. And I want to be like you said, in the proper position to be a role model when that conversation happens, when those conversations, you know what I mean? Like, you don't, you're not going to believe the message if you don't believe the messenger, they say. I want to be in that position, and that might not be for another couple of years, but I want to be there. I want to be firmly rooted in my ability to say, hey, look, you don't need to do that. I don't do it, and set a good example and be a leader, for my family in that regard.
I completely agree with that. I think that for anyone that is, we talk about male, woman, man, woman, but particularly because we're both dads, I think for any man that is really looking for a why, and they're struggling to find their own internal why, look into the eyes of your children and understand that they should and could be your why, because at some point they're going to look at you, they are looking at you as the bar. And that should be the biggest motivator for anyone. Because to your point, when that moment of truth comes, we don't want to be viewed as the hypocrite.
Yeah,
And they'll see that real quick.
absolutely. Absolutely. I had that in high school. I was kind of like, I'm not going to college. My parents didn't go to college. Why am I going to college? I mean, I never even looked at it. It gave me a great reason to not do good in school. I was like, well, my parents didn't go to college. I'm not going to college. So what do I care about my GPA? Who cares about an SAT? I'm not going to school. I didn't have a plan on what I was going to do otherwise, but I knew they didn't go, so I wasn't going. And that's it. Like, you're, as a parent, you're handing a blueprint, whether you know it or not. You're handing a blueprint of life, because you are all they have to model off of, unless there's some other significant, influence otherwise.
And I think it's really important too. I think you brought up a really good point. Like, you know, if we're a parent that we didn't go to school and we know our kids are going to be looking at that, to have that conversation with our kids saying, look, we didn't go to school, I didn't go to university, or I didn't do well in school, but this is why it's actually really important. And
Yeah.
this is how I fucked up,
Yeah.
by actually calling yourself out on the fact that you're going to be a hypocrite because you're going to ask them to do something that you didn't do yourself, but explaining why. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of us as parents don't do that,
Yeah.
you
Look,
know?
parenting is a leadership role, right? Like,
Mhm.
and a lot of stuff, a lot of conversations I love to have are about we read all these leadership management books as if it only, exists in that high rise. It exists everywhere. Even with yourself, like, leadership management and tactics apply to your everyday living, how you're managing your family, how you're engaging with others, non-work. Like, it applies everywhere. It really does.
Hmm.
Parenting's a big home for it. So with regard to where you went from there, so where'd you go from there? Like, ultra habits. Tell me the story on getting this
Yeah.
together.
So getting sober was what I call the first crucible, right? And, I got sober. Business was uh, probably the second crucible, for, like that happened concurrently. I was running to stay sane, running really far on the road, but just to stay sane. Instead of going out to the bar at night, I was running. And I've got, this redefining of who I am through business. And 2013 comes around, and I'm kind of like hitting this place in my career of a pretty good sales guy, but looking around me as to, and particularly Matthew, the previous mentor, as to what made him and what makes him special and what's enabling people to get a seat at the table. And, capability is obvious. And I thought, well, how am I going to increase my capability? So I decided to embark on an executive MBA at a very, very difficult school program here in Australia. And that was the beginning of a 4-year journey of 20-hour study weeks whilst having to hit targets. And that led me on a what I call my third crucible, where it was one of education and infusing that street smarts with some dynamic functional capability,
Hmm.
which was pretty dangerous and is pretty dangerous now in practice. And when the MBA ended in 2017, my wife said, look, we've just had our first kid. You got to do nothing for 6 months, right? Like, and she's a new mom. She's young. She still hasn't taken to being a mom yet. There's that kind of teething period where women go from being a girlfriend, wife, to actually living as a mother, right? And so I took 6 months off, and because of all the study, I hadn't been running because running takes too long. I was doing 20-minute, 15-minute workout sessions, right, while I was studying, and I went for a run in 2017. Just we went to northern New South Wales. Australia is a beautiful place physically, just without parallel in many ways. Along the east coast, New South Wales and Queensland, it's literally beach after beach after beach. And we went to a beautiful part of the country, not far from our home. Met up with my mother-in-law, and I went for a run, and I fell in love with it. And um, a friend of mine had told me they were signing up to this kind of thing called an ultra marathon. And early on in my sober days, I had gone hiking a lot, and whilst hiking started to run, but I didn't know it was actually a thing. Had I known it was a thing, I probably would have never done business. I would have become a professional ultra runner, to be honest with you.
Wow.
But I signed up for this run, and that was it. And it was so hard, so hard. And he's even is someone that running comes pretty natural to. Mile or maybe 25 kilometers in, I'm at the top of a peak. I've got road running shoes. My diet's all wrong. I had no idea what actually an ultra marathon on trail would entail. I'd been training on road. I'm at the top of this hill or mountain, this climb. We couldn't even run with the climb. Full body spasms halfway through with no one there. And I picked myself and got through it. And then that was it. I realized that this ultra running caper was really a culmination of my stance in life. And I knew that it would become my next crucible because it would become and enable me to learn more. It was going to become my physical crucible. I had done the running thing, or sorry, the MBA, the learning crucible, the business crucible. This was going to become the physical crucible.
And so what did that turn into? What are we talking? Like 50 milers, 100 milers? What's the run distances?
Yeah. Basically, just short of 100 miles,
Wow.
multiple marathons, consecutive marathons, stuff like that. What slowed down the progression of the ultra marathon piece is kids and business. It's very difficult to train in what is an inherently selfish pursuit without just being wrecked.
Yeah.
And what I then realized though was I still love to run, and I will start running ultra marathons again later on this year. What I realized was that I didn't want that to end. The learnings that have come out of the ultra marathon piece and the correlation to business and executive life, there is some deep correlation there. And that was the birth of ultra habits. That
Yeah.
was the birth of ultra
And what
habits.
are some, for example, that you're seeing that you bring back to the workplace from
It,
from the trail?
it's the ability to endure. And that is the competitive advantage.
Yeah.
That is my competitive advantage in business.
Because
And I
winning
know
in
you
business
relate to
isn't
that.
easy, right? Like it goes to if it was easy, everyone would do it. Everyone would win. Everyone would be a multimillionaire, billionaire, whatever, right? It's not. There's a reason it's not. And no, I love it. Yeah, because back in the day, I think I was like maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years in business, and I met somebody, either a networking event or I don't know, but I somehow was talking to someone. I don't remember who it was. But I told him what I was doing. I had started this business and blah, blah. I was like, oh, it must be nice having your own business. And it just came out. It's like, well, obviously you've never had a business before because there's nothing nice about it. Like it is work nonstop and you never get to leave it, right? Like when you're an employee, I mean, and I'm speaking from an owner's perspective, entrepreneur owner's perspective. Like when you're an employee, you can clock out, go home, go deal with life's other problems. When you're an entrepreneur, business owner, and that's what's putting food on the table, that's all you think about. It's nonstop. So I really do appreciate the art
I
of
know you do.
endurance, in
I know
business.
you
Yeah,
do.
for sure.
The interesting thing about that is I've been having conversations with I've had multiple conversations in this vein, but um, I've been having conversations with a woman who's a journalist for Vice,
Hmm.
and she's written a book called Everything Harder Than Everyone Else. And it's really quite impactful. She dives into subcultures. You're talking about, pornography, ultra marathoning, heavy weightlifting. And she has this view that, and there's studies in her book to back it, that people that can endure have typically had a high level of trauma. That's an interesting piece, right? So it's like, well, how do you then teach your kids to endure without making them suffer and be broken to a degree, right? You know,
Yes. And thus the birth of the comfort zone, right? Like we don't want our kids to go through that discomfort, so we give them more than probably we should to protect them from those pains, right? Like it's
yeah,
so yeah, Angela Duckworth talks about that, with grit, combination of passion and perseverance. Like how do you instill that, and help your children find that. It's a good topic because it's it's conflicted, right? We want to make them happy, we want to provide for them, and at the same time, there has to be the right balance in that. You still have to challenge them, and all
I
that.
think you create intentional context,
Yeah,
right? And I mean, people do that within sport, and they do that within a context. So it's not abusive in day to day life, and doesn't move them to endure because of a sense of brokenness and the need to inflate their personality, or a need to, there's something in the view of, how powerful it is when you have that mindset of conquering your environment. But is that coming from a place of brokenness?
yeah.
And I've actually had conversations with, just to round that out, a man named Ian Pollard, very polished Australian executive. He was the chairman of Billabong, very
Hmm.
educated. And he's a PhD, Rhodes Scholar, aristocratic in field, very nice man. He's an actuary, very good with maths. His dad was a PhD. He was almost a professional tennis player, like just super capable. But he said something to me once. He goes, I'm not a man that can run through a brick wall. I don't have that level of determination. He goes, I became successful because the bar was high when I
Hmm.
was young. My uncle was a professional tennis player. My dad was a PhD. So his view was that he didn't get super successful and competent through trauma or this need to prove to himself, but he became competent because the bar around him was high. It was just a function of the environment, which is
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's well put, and it's just for you as a dad. It's a conversation I had in my own house around the dinner table. It's like, look, I know we've got things, and when I came up, I didn't have these things. And what I want is, I want you to go farther. I want you to be having this conversation with your kids, going, "Hey, we've got things that when I was growing up, I didn't have, right?" Like, and it was the moral of the story was like, look, I didn't come this far to only come this far, right? I didn't come this far to watch you guys just kind of stay here. I want to lay this next step for you to step off of and to keep taking it to that next level. And
Mm.
maybe that's it, like to your point. And I'm glad you said that, because when you're asking the question, like, how do you instill the grit without pushing so much suffering? Like, set that bar high, set that bar high, and set the
Mm.
expectation, set the example. So you've been through a lot, and I know we're coming up on time. What are you most proud of, have with all that you've overcome?
It's probably that I'm walking with values and I'm walking with a system. And as a function of that, I've been able to attract and create and build good things around me. So I think that, I think that's probably where I feel the most sense of achievement, that, you know, I, I've been able to exert myself successfully in this life and move from where I was before to where I'm now.
Yeah, no, I love it. As you say that, I visualize, like, what you're proud of is the gap that you've overcome, like how deep you
Yeah.
were and how far you've striven. Yeah, that's awesome, man. No, good for you, man. It's freaking powerful story to just that, to show how far you can come, how far you can go, on that track. That all said, how can people find you on the podcast, how
Yep.
connect with you online,
Yep.
all that good stuff?
Yeah, man. So www.ultrahabits.co. Everything is there. LinkedIn, RJ Singh, Ultra Habits, ultra.habits at Instagram. But www.ultrahabits.co is where everything is. All the information, anything you want to know about the show or where to find me or to connect, I'm there.
Awesome, man. Now, I appreciate it. It's been an honor to have you on, man. I
Thanks for
love it.
having me,
I love
bro. I
it.
appreciate it.
You're really singing my music, man. I love it.
And I appreciate the time, Dale.
No, it's awesome. So thanks, sir. Appreciate you sharing your story. And like I say, it's going to serve somebody out there. So thanks for coming on, RJ, and I'll talk to you soon.
Over and out, man.
All right.